there is something a little bit deeper with poverty around people's sense of what they can do in life and how they control their lives.
I see trees of green, red roses too. I see them bloom for me and for you. And I think to myself, what a wonderful world.
Well, hello everybody to another amazing episode of our Diversity and Inclusion Speaker Series. Today we have a poverty awareness conversation with Willie Elliott and Joanne at Vitalia Montrose. Willie, say hello to everybody.
Hello, glad to be here today. Thank you for having me.
Hello. And Joanne, say hello and tell us a little bit about yourself.
I'm a resident here at Vitalia for a little over a year, and I've worked in poverty programs for about the last 40 years. So I have quite a bit of experience in the field.
You're a businesswoman, correct?
Yes. And
I was going to say, you recently bought that scarf. Was it recent?
No, about 30 years ago.
Where'd you get it?
I was in a layover from Greece in Belgium, and I had money left over, so I said I treat myself to a scarf. And you can wear them forever. They never, your size can change, but the scarf stays the same, so it's okay.
I love it. And Willie, you are a professor at the University of Michigan, and you are our expert today, in a sense. And so if you wouldn't mind, let's get the ball rolling, kind of in a sense of what our conversation today is, which is poverty awareness.
I am going to actually do something that's kind of out of script. I'm going to read you one quote. I won't read anything else today, but I want to read this one because I think it sets the stage well for a conversation around poverty. And then I'll let Joanne begin by asking a question. Does that sound good?
That sounds great.
In talking about the New Deal, President Franklin Roosevelt provided us a simple but powerful definition of what economic security should look like in America when he said, "Liberty requires opportunity to make a living decent according to the standard of the time, a living that gives man not only enough to live by, but something to live for. Without this opportunity," he continued, "life was no longer free, liberty no longer real, men could no longer follow the pursuit of happiness." And so that will play as a backdrop, and I'll bring it back up as we begin to discuss the different questions.
Yeah, absolutely.
Joanne, you have a question for me?
Well, we could start with the first one. What do you see is one of the underlying causes of poverty?
Yes, and this is not a simple question.
I know.
It's written simply, but it's not a simple question. It really is based on a lot of different things. When we think about the underlying cause of poverty, I would like to go back to this quote quickly. I won't read it, but Franklin Roosevelt talks about something to live for. So one way to think about poverty is whether or not I have enough money to buy basic needs. Like, can I eat today? Can I pay my bills? Roosevelt's saying, like, there's something a little bit more there. It's not just about the standard of the day, not just about the income that you have to make it through the day, but it's also about your feeling that you have something to live for, right? Because a lot of times when people are in poverty, they're in poverty for long, extended periods of time. And it can get lost on them that they're just constantly every day trying to survive, right? And in that mindset, that every day, I actually is someone who grew up poor. I was poor for maybe 20 some years. I was homeless at different periods of times. And so I've had both the practical experience of poverty and then the research experience of poverty. And when we think about causes of poverty, I mean, the simple way of thinking about it is people don't have enough money, right? I mean, and so while we're not talking about solutions yet, that's why we have conversations around things like guaranteed income and those kind of things, providing people with extra money, increase the minimum wage, the living wage, all these kinds of things, right? Because oftentimes when we think about it, we're thinking, well, they just don't have enough money to live. What I will say, and then I'll let Joanne come back in, is when people come to America, even, right? When they first come to America, they're not expecting not to suffer in some sense, right? But what they're looking for is an opportunity, right? They're looking for a chance to use their own effort and ability and to lift themselves up to reach their goals, right? And what you lose in poverty is not only the worst thing you lose is not the ability to eat. That's bad, right? We can all see that. But really, it is that sense that tomorrow is going to be the same. Like, my effort and my ability don't matter in my circumstances, and I can't deliver myself. So I want to broaden the conversation. We can have a very basic conversation about food insecurity and these kinds of things. Those are real. If you've ever been hungry, that's not fun. But there is something a little bit deeper with poverty around people's sense of what they can do in life and how they control their lives through their own effort and ability. That's really important. And so when we start thinking about causes of poverty, it's not only about income. I would argue that income is about how do I survive today, and assets or wealth accumulation is about, how can I have something to live for? It's about the future, right? In what that future looks like. And if you don't have some assets and ability to accumulate assets, then the future is not tangible to you anymore, right? When you have assets, you can begin to say, oh, one quick example, and I really will be quiet, I talk a lot, is say you're someone who's looking to buy a house, right? And when I was poor, my mother and I would occasionally just go walk into other neighborhoods and look at the houses and dream about being there. Now, we had no rational reasons for believing we'd ever get there. Nothing in our life said we'd ever be able to get there. And that did provide us with kind of a wishful hope that helped us get through the day. But when I say tangible hope, that's like, okay, now I'm starting to save a down payment. So now when I walk through the neighborhood and I go into the house, visit the house, people are like, ooh, you have money for a down payment, or you're working towards that, right? It's much more, I can begin to think about what neighborhood I might live in. Because I'm beginning to understand like how much money I'll have, where I can be, who the people might be, right? So it just becomes so much more real to us. And that's why I think assets are so important for giving people that real tangible hope that changes behavior and expectations.
I think you grew up in my neighborhood. I was also a very poor child, and my mother would manifest by taking us by the high school that I graduated from, and that wasn't the high school I was going to. We lived in a very poor neighborhood, and she'd say, you're going to graduate from this high school. And I thought, right, Mom. And by golly, between my dad was a machinist, my mom was a secretary, they started putting money together for a down payment, like you say. And it was that hope. Now, at the time, I wasn't real thrilled when my parents moved when I was 17 into junior high school. But, they did it for my younger brother and sister, so they would have better schooling and a better opportunity. I was very fortunate. I was in AP classes at my old high school, so it was okay. And going into a new school at 17 was not the best, but I'm not a shy woman, so it worked out real well. But I understood what you're saying too is the hope. It's hope that poverty is not genetic, and you just need that hope that things will get better. And
a little bit of tangibleness to that hope, right? So where it's not like unreasonable to believe this, because we all function to some degree as rational human beings. We're never totally rational, but on some level, we need some grounds for believing that I can one day get to that new high school, and it's that, and it gives you something to live for, right? Now we're not just talking about like how do I make it to tomorrow. Now I have plans, goals, structure, right?
exactly.
And these things are really important.
And my parents felt education was very important. They wanted to give us all the best education that we could have. So they felt a better quality of school and a better neighborhood would do that for all three of us. And it did help. But I had to laugh. My first day at school, people said, "Do you carry a weapon?" I said, "No." Did you ever have to fight anybody? No. It was a really rough school, but it's not the person that are in our family. We have a joke: the men that stayed in our neighborhood, unfortunately, many of them are in the penitentiary. And that is a sad part of poverty, especially for males, the incarceration rate. So that's something I saw firsthand. And they did not want that for my brother. And that was one of the main reasons we moved from the area we were in into a better school district and a better life for us.
Well, you brought up several things that we kind of slipped into consequences to some degree of poverty, right? One is
Yeah,
criminalization of poverty in many
right.
ways, but also stigma,
Yes.
right? In that,
Mhm.
because you talked about, we went to the new school, how people perceived of your neighborhood and who you were and things like that. And that also kind of falls back into causes of poverty,
Right.
because it can it can build cycles of poverty, right? Where people feel like this is people in my neighborhood don't go to school, people in my neighborhood go to
Mhm.
jail, people in my neighborhood don't do these things. And then they begin to live these because they don't see any tangible hope of breaking these cycles or getting outside of them. And so you end up with these really severe consequences of people living in poverty. And then it becomes very confusing, right? So what's the cause? Is it the lack of money, or is it that the neighborhoods they live in, their culture, people start talking about, or you even brought up something about you're not born poor, right? Where
Mhm.
some
Mhm.
economists think people are born with a lack of future orientation, they would talk about. And so they don't think or plan for the future. They're only about the present. And so if you give them
Right.
money, they'll buy steaks and whatever else, right? So all these things are interplaying, which makes the cause of poverty really difficult in having a fair conversation about it. Because part of it is just institutional structures that limit the ability of people to use their effort and ability in
Mhm.
constructive ways. But then a part of it also is, even though that's a reality, I always thought when I grew up, like when you're young, people might give you some excuses, but when you're 18, nobody cares you grew up in poverty. They just
Right.
want to, they measure you by where you're at now.
Mhm.
And so it becomes this thing where you start reproducing that poverty and you have to address things. I'll say one more thing quickly. One of the, I study, one of the things I study is like children's savings accounts, building wealth, and these kinds of
Mhm.
things to get out of poverty. But I try to make people understand, like, even if you offer them these financial institutions and these structures, and even though they weren't born without a future orientation, that's something you learn over time. And assets allow you to think about your future, but it doesn't mean I got a good college job as a professor that I all of a sudden lost all the habits that I had developed and all the ways of thinking about the world that
Mhm.
I developed just like that. Like you don't just provide a new institution, all of a sudden everything about poverty that touched you is gone. Very much not the case. And we want to believe that it is.
Right. You're right. I'm thinking back, I still do some of the habits that I had as a child growing up, where I still keep a piggy bank and all my change goes in it. It's just a habit I've had for years. Um, I I always have a food pantry, and in my family, if you had 2 cans of soup, you gave one away because there was always somebody in your neighborhood that needed something to eat. And those kind of things are, my dad was a union steward, so he was on strike a lot with the AFL-CIO. And when he was on strike, we'd all take jobs, whatever we could do, and then we'd pool all our money and pay the bills that had to be paid. And that teaches you, you grow up a lot and you realize how hard your parents work for the money that you have. For me, I think education is the key, and reading is so important. When you look at and I'm sure you've seen this, Willie, incarcerated people, such a large majority are illiterate. If you cannot read, you cannot understand that rent agreement, you can't do that job application, you can't do the job because you're not able to read. And that's something that is so important. And I started working with that a few years ago with children that were 1st through 3rd grade. I call them my reluctant readers, kids that really didn't want to learn to read, but I tried to show them that reading is so important to their futures. And I still believe that. And I think here at Montrose, at every Vitalia, we as seniors can help young people find that love of reading and the realize the importance of being a good reader in their future.
You've taken us into several things. And one is kind of like, what can someone do that's not living in poverty?
Right.
How can they help? And you mentioned some things there. Before I get into that, I would like to mention also that when you look at our life stories, I think it's hard for even poor people to understand that not everybody's poor experience is the same.
Right.
It presents different challenges, right? And so we can begin to think, well, if you just work hard, you can pull yourself out of poverty. But work doesn't all the time work for people. There's many instances where that doesn't happen. It is also the difference of, like you talked about education. My dad had an 8th grade. He graduated, he made it to the 8th grade. And so education was never on our, I didn't even know about graduate school until I was well into college. And in college was really just something where you went and played sports in my thought process and community, right? And so we didn't have that real marker of education in our lives as being the thing. I've since then, obviously I've done a lot of education and really value it. But so understanding that people, not all poor people have the same set of experiences. And neither is harder or better. It's just different. And so we have to recognize that as we're trying to craft solutions, as we're trying to have understanding of what they might be going through. And even when we start judging them, right? A lot of times what people do is judge them, right? And that's that balance, that there is some where you have to have a hard talk with them, like, okay, we're providing with the institutions and here's how you have to use them. And there are things in your life you need to change. But so, yeah, I think that was great that we just got a chance to bring up that nuance. But I wanted to also mention, when you start talking about the people and in the ways they can help, and you really mentioned education a lot. When I first started thinking about children's savings accounts, which I'll talk about a little bit later, and I was in the military. And I was in the military late. I was like 28 or so when I went to the military. My mother had cancer. I was in the law school. We got evicted from our house, and they were living in a hotel, and so I had to go to the military to help pay for things and whatever else. But when I came out, I wanted to go. After I did some other work, I wanted to go to college. And I went to the Washington University in St. Louis, and there was a guy named Michael Sherrod in there, and he was like the godfather of asset building. And I read his book, and I was really thinking about, how do we correct the welfare system, build out the welfare system, do these kinds of things. And then he asked me to work on a project with kids within a school. And providing them with these accounts and seeing how that affected their expectations, how it affected their academic achievement. And so I started thinking, like, how does this match up with solving poverty? And then I just realized what you realized probably long before I did, is that education can be a great way for people to move in and out of poverty. And so I really started focusing on education as a tool for kind of helping solve poverty. Not the only tool, but a very important tool for lots of people, for myself, to getting out of poverty.
It is a tool. And for many of us, like yourself, my dad only went to the 9th grade. College was nothing he thought was important, especially for the women in our family. I wanted to be an attorney. From the age of 14 or 15, I was going through briefs, my history teacher told my mother she's got a really fine mind. She would do well in law school. My father was like, no way, no way, you're not going to law school. But I worked for the Ohio Bell Telephone Company, who paid for my college. And it was wonderful. I got to go to two wonderful universities, and they paid every penny. And I appreciated that so much, but there were so few employees that took advantage of that. And a lot of it was because they had other life responsibilities. I was single. I could go to school at night and study and do everything. But for a lot of my friends, they already had children and other family responsibilities. So I was very fortunate that I could go to school.
One of the things is you mentioned there was kind of a gender aspect to why some people remain poor and others don't, right? We can have a race component, gender components, all these different things play differently in life experiences. I remember my mother telling me the same kind of thing, like education wasn't something that was promoted among women at that time, right? And so it was very much discouraged. And that can lead to why someone didn't get education and live long-term, in poverty. So, and I thought the things you brought up about life circumstances too. If they have kids, if they have things, right now they can't take advantage of those opportunities, even though they're available, or at least it's not enough to only provide, for example, free college, but then you also have to provide some kind of subsistence living so that they can stop their work, do their education to get into a better spot, which is what the wealthy people do all the time, right? They make sure that they provide their kids an education, do all these different things, make sure they go on trips so that they're really they can take advantage, take a lesser job that will build their credentials more. It pays less, but it actually has a lot better benefit for them long-term. They leverage that. And so all of these things, that's why I said in the beginning that poverty, the causes of poverty are very complicated and difficult to talk about, right? Because people don't want to recognize, because as soon as I recognize that your gender could have had a role in the amount of wealth that you build up, somehow in my own mind, diminishing my own effort and ability. Somehow that says the work that I did to get to where I'm at is somehow less because you weren't on level footing. So then we don't want to recognize that there's this inequality in the system. That goes back to this a life worth living, right? Really, we're talking to a large degree about the American dream and who has access to it, right? And what is needed to not only like get through the day, but actually like go to school and thrive in school and what's all needed in those things. So I think you did a great job, Joanne, so far, of just bringing out different things that are relevant and important for understanding poverty.
Well, when I was growing up, you could be a nurse, a teacher, or a secretary. I didn't want to be any of those things. I actually wanted to go into genetics or law. At the end of my career with Bell, I was a paralegal for 6 attorneys. So I got part of my law thing. But I really think now I have 2 granddaughters, and I tell them to do whatever they really have their passion for. I would love to have done forensic biology kind of things, and just really genetics were my thing, and sciences. But women did not have those opportunities. And I was luckier than most. If I was a woman of color, I would have even had less opportunity for those kinds of jobs. So I understand that.
We have a lot of connection because I actually, when I got out the military, I went to the military because I had to drop out of law school. And while they had told me when I was in the military, I'd be able to take my law school, but I could run fast and do push-ups. And so they kept sending me to different places. So every time I signed up for school, I got sent somewhere. So I never got a chance to do that. And then when I got out, it was during September 11th, and there was stop loss. And I got stop loss. So I actually lost the job I was supposed to get when I came out. And I ended up going to paralegal. Basically, I worked as a clerk, really, within a law firm. So we have those, and I've never been able to finish my law. It was always my dream to finish my law degree.
See?
I actually got a degree in social work, but I ended up because the money, I got accepted into the law program and the social work program, but there was far more money for the social work piece, so I ended up just doing that. But the point with it all is like all these things happen to individuals that are largely outside of their control. And so in real quickly, because I want to tie it into one of our questions, is when I was in MSW student master's level program, I went bankrupt, right? Because we had to come out of military. So I went bankrupt. One of my faculty members, Michael Sheraton, actually, and his family, actually helped provide us with money, watch my kids at certain times, did all these things. My point is, when we think about what individuals can do and what organizations can do, they can do these kinds of things. The problem with it is, and they should, but the problem with it is it's very random. So I got that help while another person didn't get that help. So I succeed not only because of my effort and ability, because I did work hard, but also because I had these interventions. And this is why totally relying on philanthropy and on charity will never solve poverty. So if we're trying, the organizations and individuals have to participate in it, but the government has a role in providing an institutional structure that allows their participation to reach everybody equally, because you don't have access to all the poor people. You don't have roles on them and all these different things. You don't know who they are. So you can be very random about that, right? And just, I see this person, I help them. Where the government can be much more helpful in providing institutional structures that allow people to reach a broader range of people and let this be a lot less random.
Well, I think part of what the government and corporations can do that would really help is to have a shadowing program where if I know at the Cleveland Clinic, they have a great program. If you would like to be an anesthesiologist or a tech, they bring you in and you follow around a person who does that job. They do this every summer with young high schoolers. They can see what the job entails and see if this is something that they would like to pursue. I think this would be a way for corporations to open their doors a little more and say, is this really what you'd like to study in college? Is this what you'd like to do? And give them more of a focus of what their careers would be like.
No, for sure. And not only do they need to open up their doors and allow these apprenticeships and internships and these types of things, but they also need to open up their wallets.
Yep.
Right, they need to, and the government needs to open up its wallet, right? We need to understand. This is always like a kind of a rub, even within academics. Some people are behavioralists, and so they think everything's about what the individual does, and they can lift themselves up. And some people are institutionalists, and really, we need this mix because it's partly the individual and it's partly the institutions. And what we're really striving for, what we see now in poverty, is that we can, unfortunately, through zip codes, through gender, through race, fairly accurately predict who the poor are going to be. It's not random. What we want is a system in which it's random, where it's based on effort and ability, where these patterns of poverty don't exist, where the same people aren't always poor. And the only way to accomplish that is to make sure that whatever solutions we put in place are accessible to a large range of people, instead of just those who get lucky, who meet the right person in a master's program, or way before that, I met other people too, help police.
And we have so many of the working poor who are just below the line to receive benefits. So they don't receive all the benefits that a person who is poor. And what happens is sometimes that person decides, why should I bother? If I make less money, I'll get more benefits. And this is something that we see over and over again, and it kind of prohibits anyone wanting to go further and to do more.
Joanne, can I challenge you on that?
Sure.
We actually, this is kind of a misnomer. I think the basic thing you're saying is correct, but we don't see it over and over again. Actually, in the data, it's very limited that people decide there's when we have those cases, right? This is why, even if we give everybody access to everything, everything's perfect, you'll still have some people who work hard and some people who don't. If you have kids, you realize right away, my kids grew up in privilege, and and they don't always work, right? And they don't. So there are always going to be these things that separate us. But what I want to say, so I just want to make sure that we're sure that most poor people want to work and want to get ahead.
Oh, I
But
agree.
but it does complicate it when you have a system that, and I think you brought up something really, really important, that it's not only those people below the poverty line, but those people right above the poverty line that really, really suffer, even fairly above the poverty line nowadays, can really get in a bind and not be able to build the assets and the wealth and really have the opportunities. And what it has created in our society, talking about consequences, is bitterness against one another, right? Because people who are slightly above the poverty line, seeing people below the poverty line getting benefits, can make them very bitter against those people getting the benefits. What they really need to be thinking about is those people need the benefits and we do too, right? But we typically don't think that way. It's not a matter of not giving them benefits, but it's a matter of also providing benefits for that group of people who aren't getting the tax breaks and are being hammered, who really need things. And if we can't solve that bitterness between us and understand that, like, it's not a limited pie where we're always fighting for the scraps, then we can't really get policies done that solve poverty, because it requires a collective push. So as we ask, what can people do? Yeah, you can donate, you can share your time, and do all these things. What we really need everyone to do is, because we know how to solve poverty, it's not an issue of figuring out ways to solve poverty, but what we have is a lack of a coalition strong enough to say we're going to push these policies through that we know will make a difference. They keep us fighting amongst each other and bitter at one another, and then we can't collectively join together to do what we need to do, and we all suffer, and our kids suffer, and those who have continue to have, and those who don't continue not to have. And until we can, that is even among academics, right? And I'll be quick on this one. If you're a big researcher and you get a large grant to study your idea, or even your senators, I work with senators a lot, and they come out with some policy, and somebody else comes out with a very similar policy, and but they don't want to join together and work together because they want credit for it. The academic wants the money to come to his grants. He needs that to keep his center going, and so he won't come together with other academics with similar ideas, and instead they keep trying to explain how they're different instead of how they're the same, and so we never can build those coalitions. Not from the grassroots, not from the academia, not from the senators and Congress people. So that is really, I'm heavily involved in all these conversations. Our ability to do that, and for all of you to gather together and recognize that we're not actually at odds, in that we have very similar needs, and we must pull together, we'll never get this done. We'll always be close. It will always get watered down in the end, and they'll pass something that's not really going to work, as opposed to doing what they really need to do.
That's a very good point. My daughter is the head grant writer for a long time for Ohio State University, and she'd go to the State House and she'd go to Washington and lobby, and she would tell me, Mom, there's money out there for programs that they want. The money's there. But like you say, it gets watered down, and people get more divisive than coming together. And that's, how can we solve that? How can we make that better? Because it just makes people angry, one group against another, and that's not good. We're not getting anywhere.
Look at us, Joanne. If we were walking down the street together, people would not connect us.
True.
Like, we would look like we're from very different worlds in some ways. However, by us having this conversation, you and I know we're actually have a lot of things in common, a lot of things similar.
Yep.
And so it's that kind of effort and work that we all need to do to really get this done, right? It's to recognize what we share in common, even if we listen to different music and we do right? The basic things of life are the basic things of life that affect us all.
You're right. You're right. And do you have children, may I ask? Willie, do you have children?
I have children? I have 3. I have real quick, I have a freshman, And I have one senior and then one sophomore in college.
Have they
Two
looked in the
girls and a
back?
boy.
Have they looked in the backyard and thought there was a money tree back there?
They don't go to the backyard. That's too far to walk. They just stare at me and like, where's more money? You're going to fall off.
I have.
Dad, I want an apartment. I already got you an apartment I'm paying for you to be at college, but I want a better apartment. Well, you need to go work.
I also have 3 children and 3 grandchildren. And when my first daughter went to college, everything was brand new and coordinated. By the time the third one went, we were picking things up off the street, because at the end of the school year, we buy things from garage sales. They throw it out anyway, so it wasn't a big deal. And your values change a lot, and it's really interesting.
Hold on that for a real quick second.
Mhm.
I keep mentioning children's savings accounts. So really, we have this idea of giving kids savings accounts from birth. Like
Mhm.
Pennsylvania has done it now, so it's statewide. Every kid born gets a savings account. And then we think about how companies and how individuals can donate to these accounts. There's a
Mhm.
bunch of other states that are starting to do it in cities. And so you start saving and then you put them in an asset building account, so it grows over time.
Mhm.
Families can save, but then also other people can dump it in. My point is, I do all this study around all these stuff and understand how they work, and I save for college, right? However, my first kid went, it was $20,000 a year. My senior's getting ready to go, that'd be another $20,000 a year. Well, you know what? I didn't save that much,
Really,
right?
none of us did.
I didn't save that much, right? And then I'm thinking about my third one coming out, and I'm like, oh, gee, like, you know, and look at my salary, like, well, you make decent money, but not when you start throwing out, you know, $40,000 a year just for tuition and room and board, and then you got to pay for all the other stuff that goes along with that, and it's like, wow. And
Mhm.
I'm someone who studies this every day, and it's still shocking to me on how much, and I work in academia, and it's still shocking to me how much it costs. And not just in tuition, but in all the other kinds of expenses that would go along with kids having a really productive
Yes.
education career. So these things really require collective effort, and it can't be something that we dump on families altogether. There needs to be government assistance. There needs to be companies and others that are investing in these things and helping. Well, and I really wish I want to bring this in. This is really, really important. It is not only about having money to go to college, but having some money when you leave college and not leaving in debt. I've done a lot of research around this. If you leave in big debt, you're not going to take the same kinds of jobs because you have to take jobs for money. You're not going to start your family as soon because you feel like you're in debt. You're not going to buy a house as soon, which means you won't start your 401k and not, saving for retirement, which means you'll have far less. We know this is a few years difference. And when you start to save for retirement, it makes a huge difference in the end of time. So we have to think about our education system and financing it, not only about do the kids have enough money to pay for college, but also how they pay for college matters. Is it going to put them into more debt or using a lot of student loans? And then do they come out with some money so they can purchase a house early on and have equity in that house later on, right? And things like that. So we have a little ways to go in our thinking. It is not just about free tuition.
Well, I made a deal with my kids. My mother left me a good deal of money. I paid all 3 of my kids' college educations. They came out with no loans. They all have their own homes, and I told them I'll all come and live with them at certain times. And they're like,
that's great.
I said, I paid for your house, so now I can come and live there. I don't want to, but that's our joke. And I really have seen what that does when you have those big debts looming over your head. Their friends and their partners have to make such decisions as to which jobs they take, how long they stay in that job. Will they ever be able to afford a home? It really is an albatross. And my kids, like yours, probably they went for scholarships. My kids were really lucky. They got their masters paid for on full scholarships. But that was a lot of, and they worked jobs during college. So it was a lot of work for them. But this that I did, people have said to me, oh, you could have put it in your own 401k or whatever. But this, I felt like I was helping their future because they wouldn't have to take jobs they didn't want to. That burden was off of them for now.
And you know what? And you also created inequality.
Well,
Right,
probably.
because people are going to look. My one book I wrote about my middle daughter, when she was in like fifth grade, fourth or fifth grade, I got a burr up my butt, if you will, that like that I'm going to get her into advanced math.
Oh boy.
Now at the time, she wasn't. Her state assessment scores were right around average, right? But I really pushed because I knew it would give her long-term benefits, right? That people wouldn't even understand later. And so after a lot of fighting with the teachers and stuff, I got her into that. We got her into that, my wife and I. And a year later, all of a sudden her scores were above a lot of her cohorts. Why? Because in advanced math, they teach you next year's math, but they test you on the state assessment test on this year's math. And so who's going to do better? The kid who's doing this year's math or the kid who's already doing next year's math? And the way the tests work, the harder questions you can answer, the harder questions you get, the bigger your score is, right? And now she's a senior, and people don't even, they look at her as being a smart math person, and she's a good worker and all those things. But a lot of it was because of us knowing to provide her with that advantage. And now it has become totally undiscernible whether or not it's because of her own effort and ability and her own thing. And nobody ever sees or asks about us putting her in advanced math. They just see someone, right? And so when you leverage your kid and give them, this is what I'm saying, why we have to think about our financial aid differently. Right. You should do that. That's not a critique. I think that's the right, I'm going to do it for my kids. I can tell you that right now, right? But we have to make sure that these other kids not only have the ability to get into college, they have to come out of college with some money so they can have a good start in life, right? Yeah. That's as important for getting a good return on that degree. And that's why if you study like a low income person with a degree and a higher income person with a degree, the lower income person doesn't get the same return on a degree. That's because they come out with debt and all the other things. So education by itself will not solve this problem.
Correct.
However, it's really important to have, and now we just have to figure out ways to finance it and do it so that it benefits everybody equally, so it can be that great equalizer in society we all want it to be. Right now, it can't be that because you're giving your kids money. I'm making my kids go to advanced math. I'm paying for it, right? All these things are happening. These other kids aren't doing. And so the system doesn't work. We point to education all the time, and it is important. That's not an argument for not doing it, but we need to do it better so that it actually works and does what we want it to do.
Willie, my school was so poor that there were students in my school who did not have hot water and would take showers at the junior high school and the high school, and we'd provide the soap and towels. When we had food drives, if at the end of the month, the kids would have large sandwiches because there was nothing else to eat in the house. And if they stole your lunch, it wasn't because they were pranking you. They were truly very hungry. So these are things that I remember and realize that all of us could be in this situation. And in my family, we were at times. I can remember once my dad was on strike and we got a 50-pound bag of potatoes. We ate potatoes and every guise there was till it finished. And it was just part of life. It really was. I think it makes you, in ways, it made me stronger. It makes you.
Let me say one quick thing, Joanne. I think you remember this. Remember those pumps that used to be out in parks and stuff? Where you could pump water. That's where we got a lot of our water for bathing and stuff. You know what I mean? So I get that, right?
Yeah, we grew our own gardens. And we ate out of them. And thank goodness our grandparents lived close by because they would help us. But like you say, Willie, if you and I met on the street, we would be considered dissimilar. But when you sit down and talk, you realize we're very similar in so many ways. And
much closer than you are far apart.
Exactly.
Much closer together than you are far apart. And I just want to wrap this up in a way that I can. But I mean, I love hearing that, and I've never thought about this, is the fact that, like, yes, education is important, but yet if you do come out of the education in crippling debt, it actually isn't really that, it doesn't benefit you so much more,
Right.
than if you're coming out with a lot less of that debt and the responsibilities. Very fascinating stuff. Willie, thank you so much for sitting here with us and kind of shining the light on a lot of this stuff, because now all of a sudden I'm going to go to my partner here and I'm going to tell her, hey, your 10-year-old needs to get pushed into better math. We got to force him on it. And so that way, even though he's going to hate us from that for a second or for a little bit, it will have huge benefits. And even thinking and reflecting on my own life, that was kind of very similar. In about 6th or 7th grade, I was getting in a lot of trouble. And then my mom came to school and sat in my classes and was like, you're not challenging my kid enough. These classes aren't challenging my kid enough. Put him in harder classes. And so that's ended up what happening. About 7th grade, I got put into harder classes. I started becoming engaged more in school. I started becoming then, a little bit more in front of my productive, yes, than my friends and family, my friends that grew up in the same neighborhood. So that's all super incredibly informative information. Joanne, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Willie, thank you so much. This was a great
Nice
conversation.
to meet you, Willie. Nice to meet you, both of you. And this was good.
And we will thank you all for listening to another one of our episodes of our diversity and inclusion speaker series with Willie here and Joanne at the Vitalia Montrose. Thank you all. We'll see you all next time.
Thank you. Okay, bye-bye.
And I think to myself, what a wonderful